if you have a seat right over there, I will let your consultant know when it's ready.
All right, thanks.
Hey, Adrian. 12:15 is here.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Hello, Jessica.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, I'm Adrian. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Will you need to log onto a computer for what we're working on today?
No, I've actually got my own.
All right, awesome. Is there a particular space you'd like to work in?
What do you mean?
Have you been here before?
No.
All right. Are you working on paper?
Yes.
Then we'll just do it in the greenhouse, kind of like this main area here, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, awesome. So do you have a hard copy of the paper, or is it on the computer?
I actually have both. Is there a place I can plug my computer in?
Yeah, there's a port right there behind you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, mine's about ready to die. Okay.
So tell me a little bit about the assignment you're working on. Do you have a prompt?
Yeah, actually I do. It's an 8 to 10 page argumentative research paper,
Okay.
and I've not ever written anything that long, and I'm like a terrible writer.
Oh,
so
that's not true.
yeah.
No, something to remember is that writing's a process. So like when I had 101, if I had submitted those papers for my application here, my bosses would have kicked me probably out of the college. So, that's totally okay. And I'm sure you're doing fine.
Well, thanks.
So let's just look over the prompt and see kind of what
Okay.
you got going on. Now that you've completed your research and updated your argument, you may begin working on your main argument paper, topics one you've chosen, requirements, specific, focused target audience, clear purpose or goal, a thesis statement, well-organized, smooth transitions, draw from 6 credible sources, sources cited and documented correctly using MLA or APA, 8 to 10 pages. All right, so do you have any main concerns, something you're specifically worried about?
Yeah, it kind of just sounds like it's a lot of information. Like, I know what I'm trying to say, but it doesn't really come off like I know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I think grammar, I'm not really that great at that either.
All right, awesome. So you want to just look at like thesis and organization, stuff like that, like kind of cohesion.
Yeah.
All right, is there anything else that you're kind of worried about?
No, I think that's about it.
All right, awesome. Do you have, can I see your hard copy of your paper?
Yeah.
All right. And I like to read the papers out loud as I go through. Is that something you're comfortable with?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, and this is all right if I write in the margins too?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, awesome. Well, let's get going. Many accounting employers and accounting students alike. So there are a few things I noticed that we can talk about. So there's like your thesis statement could use a little bit of working on. Your integrating sources is something you're kind of weak at, as well as we'll talk about finding credible sources, what credible sources look like and how we can identify those as you go forward. And then also working on your conclusion to make sure it's something that really kind of sticks with the audience once it ends over. And there are a few low order concern things too that we can talk about at the end, but those are kind of the main things.
Okay.
If that works for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, and I'll put those on the ROC so we can kind of have like a roadmap for what the consultation will be as we go forward.
Yeah, sure.
So with your thesis statement, we'll just read through it as it is now. My goal is that this paper can sway that opinion in a less biased viewpoint and ultimately show that online accounting education is not necessarily a negative choice. So the way it's written as is, you have this paper can sway that opinion. It's not stated within the sentence what that opinion is. And ultimately show that online accounting is not necessarily a negative choice. And so with your thesis statement, ideally what you would like is that if you took that sentence just kind of out of the paper and just read it on its own, it would be clear what your argument is. So this is what I think about this topic, and here's what the evidence I have to prove it. And it's one sentence, so you obviously can't fit everything that you have in an 8 to 10 page paper in, but you want it to kind of stand alone.
Okay, so I should say, like, in this paper, I am going to... You
want to kind of stay away from in this paper, I'm going to, but everything that follows that might be okay. So we have an acronym that we work with, TOE, and we'll workshop with that to help get your thesis statement a little bit in line. So TOE, T is for topic, and your topic is online accounting degrees, right?
Yeah.
Just in its broadest sense.
Right.
So I'll just put ACC on here for sake of space. And an O is for opinion. So your opinion is that they are not as negative as some people may see them, roughly.
Yeah, kind of like they are starting to be more used and more accepted. So they shouldn't have as much of like a negative connotation.
Yeah. So their opinion. So the opinion is that they are growing to be more accepted, sort of, or that they should be more accepted.
Yeah.
Okay. And so opinion is evidence. And just for sake of argument, let's say you're writing about tacos. So tacos, opinion, tacos are the best food ever, end of discussion. Your evidence could be something along the lines of they're cheap, people love them, and they're easy to eat because they're just, hold them in your hand. It's not super messy or anything like that. And so if you're going to use that for your paper, your 3 big points would be that they're cheap, they're popular, and they're easy to eat. And so what are your main points throughout the paper?
Can I actually see it real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
I think what I'm trying to say the most is, I talk about like how people think that it's not the best way to get your degree.
Sort of like context setting.
Right. But then I talk about, about how it's mostly about the CPA exam. Like it only matters like if you do really well in the CPA exam. More people are starting to do them because they're easier to get the degree. And so they're more broadly accepted because of the massive number of students enrolling in the online schools. And then recruiters aren't turning people away because of them anymore like they used to. So I guess if I were to do the 3 that you were doing, the CPA exam scores are more important. More people are enrolling in the online accounting degrees. So they have to start being more accepted. And recruiters are starting to shift away from having stigma on them because of their popularity, I guess. Something like that. But I do talk a lot about like where the stigma used to come from and how that's not really there anymore.
Yeah, and having that in where people aren't, having that in where people talking about how some accountants, older accountants perhaps view it kind of negatively. That's all important because you want to set the context for your audience so they know kind of what the discussion is. But your arguments for them are that the CPA exams are more important than the actual degree anyway.
Right.
And that there are a growing number of students that are going for the online degree rather than on-campus degrees. And
they're more accessible.
Yeah, so numbers-wise, you kind of have to go along with that. And then recruiters aren't turning people away.
Yeah.
And so you can mush all that together and sort of combine it to where a thesis, and we can just leave this as like a working thesis so you can tweak it later on once you start revising.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be absolutely set in stone at this point, but something using this you can kind of narrow it down to like online accounting degrees, should not be seen as inferior degrees. Because the CPA exams are seen as more important. There are a growing number of students using them, or it is more accessible to students, and recruiters do not turn people away for online accounting degrees.
So kind of like listing, like, here's why, okay.
Yeah, so setting up your opinion, like online accounting degree should not be seen as inferior because, and then sort of listing these reasons here.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
And when you do that, when you kind of mush all that together, you have one sentence that easily establishes what your argument is, so that it can be, if it was plucked from the paper and someone read that, they'd be like, oh, Jessica sees online accounting degrees in this way. And also it can set up sort of a roadmap. So as we look through, if there are places where, in your paper, where it kind of diverges into maybe a tangent that feels irrelevant, or you jump from one point to the next and then back to another point, it kind of serves as a roadmap. So you can talk about those things kind of in that order. And so it's a little bit more focused. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now we've got your thesis covered. Let's look at the actual body of your paper. Like we talked about before with the thesis statement, it kind of works as a roadmap for your organization. And throughout, you seem to be pretty well on track. There aren't any places that I can think of right now where you kind of deviate at all. It's pretty good. You follow these ideas well. Something you do, though, is, let's take a look at this paragraph right here. Your first body paragraph. The first sentence says, Eddie Mitrogene, an accounting professor at Georgia Southern University, and Thomas Nolan, an accounting professor at the University of South Alabama, did a survey on CPA accounting employers' perceptions of online accounting degrees. The problem with that is that you need to have a topic sentence, and that you can think of it as like the thesis statement for your paragraph.
Okay.
So that it covers what the point of that paragraph is going to be in a sort of succinct manner. And it doesn't always have to be the first sentence in your paragraph, but that's just an easy way to go. So let's look at what this study's about. After doing their research, they argue through results that the majority of accounting employers do not discriminate against online accounting degrees. And so it seems like that's the idea of your paragraph, correct?
Yeah.
So what you would like to do is that, and you do this a lot, meaning that you start off a lot of your paragraphs with mentioning a study that's conducted, but rather what you should be doing is making your first sentence sort of the idea that you're using the study to back up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you're citing a study that's looking at the success rate of online accounting graduates, you want to talk about how successful or unsuccessful they are, and then have the study that talks about that come afterwards. Does that make sense? And I'll write that on here. Use topic sentences.
To kind of like introduce main point? Or, okay.
Yeah. So once again, in this paragraph, you mentioned a few different studies, but they're all centered around the idea that employers don't discriminate against online accounting degrees. That's your main idea, and you're just kind of revolving all of your sources around that. And so that idea that employers don't really care where people get their degree, if it's online or not, that should be what your first sentence starts out as.
Right.
And probably in a lot of cases, I can't say this for every paragraph, but even for this one here, after doing their research, they argue that the majority of accounting employers do not discriminate against online accounting degrees. That little bit right there, you would need to tweak it obviously a little bit, but most of that sentence could probably just be shifted up to the first sentence, so you don't even necessarily have to rewrite a whole lot. Because if you're talking about these studies and the ideas you're trying to back them up with, you'll probably have a sentence somewhere in the middle that can function as a topic sentence. It's just a matter of cutting and pasting it where you want it to be, and then rewording it so it flows well. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, awesome.
Okay. Now, got my own, I don't know why I took yours.
So with source integration, let's just look at this sentence, for example. Oscar Gutierrez refutes many of Lindquist's points in his article. So when you're working in sources, and especially with a paper like this, where something good that you do in your writing is you're taking different writers who have different points of view and kind of synthesizing them. So you're going, this author says this, But this author is like, no, that's not accurate, and kind of, once again, setting up context for your audience so they know what the discussion is. And that's really strong, and that's a good thing that you're working through. But as far as like the blunt integration of your sources, it's a little weak. Because here, Oscar Gutierrez refutes many of Lindquist's points in his article. They do not agree on the fact that these schools have students who succeed. So one thing you haven't done within those sentences and say what his article is. Really, you mentioned Oscar Gutierrez, but there's no establishment of is he a professor or what is he? It's really broad, so you're not using any sort of specific quote or specific evidence there. And so it's kind of basic, what we'll work on in a second, is like basically the quote equivalent to toe. It's the quote sandwich. And so there are three things you want to do as well. You want to introduce the author and the source. So introduce. So in this case, would be Oscar Gutierrez, or in his article, whatever the title is. Now, with I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about source accurate or like good sources, and so with this here. Rachel Zupek, a reporter from CNN News, also obtained results from a survey that show that employers not only think online degrees are credible, but even that they may be better. Let's say you're writing a research paper about how this event in history led to a bunch of series of events or whatever. If you're doing about like a news story, like something that happened at a certain point in time, CNN probably wouldn't be a bad place to go. But you're talking about a survey, not an event or an occurrence or anything like that.
Okay.
And where you're talking about the survey, CNN didn't conduct the survey, and even if they did, it could have been a Facebook poll or something like that. That's not so accurate.
Okay, so should you not use like news sources for these things? Like
when it comes to like surveys, sort of statistical things like that, you would ideally pull from an academic journal, so something that pulled up on Academic Search Complete, or
What's that?
It is on the EKU's database through the library. You can go in and search online accounting degrees, and it'll pull up a bunch of academic peer review articles. So articles written by doctorates and professors, and their articles have also been read by doctors and professors to make sure that it's accurate and it's not a bunch of BS or anything like that.
Okay, so if I want a credible source, I should look through there?
You should look through there. And a lot of times, like with the survey that's mentioned here, a lot of these news stories were like, oh, a study shows this. It summarizes that because a lot of people don't have access to that specific survey or article. But where you're an EKU student, you can get to that article through the database for free.
Okay.
So you could probably find this survey and kind of skip over the CNN part, because CNN's functioning as the middleman.
Okay. So basically find the survey.
Find the
cite
survey.
the survey instead of citing the people from the survey.
Yes, because with this, it's sort of like a he said, she said thing.
Okay.
With CNN citing the survey. CNN says that this person says this. And what you want to do is go to the person who says that rather than finding a summary from someone else. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And I'll
do that.
And I'll write on here kind of how to get to the database.
I'll put that on here too to find.
library.eku.edu. Databases.
Okay.
Academic Search Complete.
And that's on the EKU website?
It's on the EKU's library website, so it should be library.eku.edu.
Okay. I'm just going to put that on there so I remember
Yeah.
it later.
And then there should be a tab, probably like the little top banner that says databases. And you click that, and there's a million different databases for all sorts of different disciplines. So for like art and criminology, but Academic Search Complete kind of has all of that bunched into one. It's the broader one,
Okay.
and that's what you'd want to go to, and it should be like the first one mentioned.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and that will have a lot of credible sources for you to get from.
Okay. You also mentioned conclusion
Yeah.
in here too. And that's something that I kind of didn't feel very good about
Yeah.
when I was writing this.
And conclusion, even for me, conclusions are the hardest thing to do because it's tough to wrap everything a neat bow. So I definitely sympathize with that. So Metrogene and Nolan claim that the results of their study show that there is not a significant difference in recruiters' perceptions. Haney's interview suggests that about 75% of recruiting clients have embraced online credentials. Lindquist says that school can further the aptitude of their online degrees by gaining accreditation from specific degree programs. All results from students or from studies and interviews with certain experts and reporters in the specific realm of accounting, recruiters' perception of online degrees show that most employers in today's business world do not perceive an applicant negatively because of the fact that they attain their degree online. And so with the conclusion, you want to, open broad. And because the introduction, you're setting up like, this is what the paper's going to be about. It's going to be about their online accounting degrees. Different people have different feelings about that. And then you get a little bit narrow. My opinion is that they should be seen as more credible because of the reasons you go over in your thesis.
In my CMS class, though, they said that towards your conclusion, you should review your main point. So should I still do that in the conclusion?
You should. You don't have to hit by. You don't want to do it in such a way that's in this paper, I have discussed these 3 things, but you can do a brief summary. So here.
So maybe shorten this a little bit?
Shorten it a little bit because in these first few sentences, you mention 1, 2, 3 different sources that summarize, or 3 different sources that say kind of the stuff you've talked about before. In your conclusion, you don't necessarily have to go that narrow. You can, because in the paper you've already talked about these things.
Okay.
So in your conclusion, you can just kind of tag it off with this sentence here or something similar to it. So results from studies and interviews with certain experts and reporters in the specific realm of accounting recruiters' perception show that the business world does not perceive people negatively because of their accounting degrees. You can just kind of go with a statement like that, and you don't have to back it up because you've already backed it up earlier in the paper.
Right.
And so kind of broad summaries like that work, but you also, have you heard, has your professors talked about the so what question?
The what?
The so what question?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So all that means is when you get to the end of your paper, you want to imagine that your audience is asking, okay, so what? Meaning that throughout the paper you've talked about online accounting degrees and the negatives of, or not the negatives of them, the negative perceptions people have and why they shouldn't hold those perceptions. You go through all that, and then once you get to the conclusion, the audience is thinking, so what? What's the purpose of this? Why is it worth my time to read through this paper?
Okay.
And you want to try to answer that. And so really, why did you pick this as a topic to go through?
Well, I am actually thinking about accounting, and when I started to look at schools, everyone was like, well, don't do an online degree because people don't take those online degrees. And obviously I'm here at Eastern, I'm not doing an online degree.
Yeah.
But I always wondered, why do people think that? Because I know I have another friend who's doing an online degree because she works full time. And I was like, well, I don't think that means she shouldn't get a job. So it's kind of something that I've been looking at and then that my friends have been looking at. So I just wanted to see what the conversation was around all of this.
And mentioning your friend, it kind of cues into that. For some people may need to get an online degree, whether that's for financial reasons. I don't know that, if that's cheaper or anything, but that could be a factor. Or people could be parents that are raising kids, and online's more practical, and they shouldn't be, pushed out of a job because they got an
Right.
online degree.
I just think that if you got your degree, then you should be okay to do what you need to do, especially because they look at your CPA exam more than they look at like where your degree comes from.
And so that is the type of thing that kind of answers the so what question. So if I read through this up to the conclusion and I'm like, so what, then you respond with, a lot of people need online degrees for such and such reasons, and they shouldn't be pushed out of a job. Like these perceptions are affecting people's lives and the job market and accounting in various different ways. So you want to make it practical for them, and make them see like, oh, this is something important. And so going with like saying like this is something that people could not be getting jobs because of the fact they have an online degree, and that doesn't make any sense, because if you have the degree, you have the degree, and if you pass the CPA, then you should be good. And that's an idea that you should leave your audience off with, because that answers that so what question. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what should I change, like? So basically, like, cut my summary section down a little bit.
Cut it down a little bit, and if you want to use a source, that's okay, but you just want to keep it pretty broad. Because once again, you've already spent 8 pages using sources and making more specific arguments. But
so
you
maybe
can kind of
not
broaden that up.
something like new material.
No new material. If there's an article mentioned earlier that was really strong or prevalent, you can go with that, but definitely don't introduce anything new. But with as many things a college student has to worry about, especially non-traditional students, deciding whether an online education is going to hurt them in the long run should not be an issue. And so that's already kind of hitting at what we were talking about.
And then
so
maybe
so maybe just kind of expand on that a little bit. Here you go back to the Matrijan and Noel point that it's the CPA is what matters. You could move, maybe not that exact sentence, but move that idea earlier in the conclusion. So just kind of take this sentence and just kind of push that back up to where you're reviewing your points, and then spend the rest of the conclusion talking about the students are having to make these decisions on whether online degrees are going to hurt them, and they shouldn't have to make those decisions because they have the degree, the CPA scores are what matter. That's where you want to make it a little bit more practical. So the so what should be ending on what I want people to like take away from it. Yes.
But then, so should my last line be like super so what, I guess?
Well, let's look at what your last line is now. With its rapidly growing prevalence, everyone is going to have to embrace it, or many programs, as well as the accounting program, will suffer. So that's kind of a negative note to end on, and the very last word of your paper is suffer. We don't necessarily.
the very last thing I did after writing this paper was suffer. So,
that's understandable. But you mentioned the idea of everyone's going to have to embrace it. That sounds a little bit negative, but you could spin that to if we embrace these online degrees, then that'll make easier the lives of people who are trying to get into accounting. You can even take that same idea, just spin it a little bit more optimistically, and I think that would be a strong way. So those are the big things. Those are the biggest things to hit on in your revision, and that'll take up most of the time. But there are a few like small things that you could work on as well. So that's stuff like first-person language.
So that was like in the thesis saying my.
Yeah, I think it was only in the thesis. There may have been a few other places that you do it. Excuse me, but you want to stay away from I, me, my, stuff like that. Because it feels a little bit too conversational when you do stuff like that. If you and I are just talking about online accounting, just at a coffee shop or whatever, you can obviously say stuff like, I think this, or I think that, or I feel this way. But when you're doing an academic paper, academic, that word alone carries a lot of weight. And so you want to try to match that weight in your paper as much as it can, just seem a little bit more authoritative. And that's what will happen if you take out the I's and stuff. And
Okay.
once again, I think that's only in your thesis statement.
Yeah, okay.
But if there are other places, you want to stay away from that.
Okay.
And then it's gotten really bright all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's not nice.
Then contractions are another thing. Let me see.
Is that like don't and stuff?
Yeah.
Because I've gotten in trouble
Yeah.
for that before.
So even right here on the first page, you use don't. And that's sort of the same thing, or it gives the same vibe as the first person language. It just feels a little bit too casual.
Yeah.
And those are, don'ts. And I believe that's everything I have. Do you have any questions about anything?
No, I think you've about covered most of it.
All right, awesome.
Okay.
Well,
Do you mind just like real quick going over like these are the main things? Because that just like helps me like remember.
So with the main things, we talked about your thesis and the sentence I wrote down on here. You can manipulate it, do whatever you want with it for what works with your paper, but you want to make sure that all of those toe components are in there. Just to make sure that you have a clear thesis that kind of works throughout the whole paper.
Right.
Your topic sentences, once again, you want your topic sentences to be the main idea of the paragraph, sort of a mini thesis for that little body of writing you have. So take out the places where you start out with mentioning a study and put in the idea you want that study to back up, essentially. Talked about source integration, worked with the quote sandwich here, and how to find the credible sources. And I wrote the library.eku.edu link and then go to academic search complete. So that way, if you're looking for stuff further on for this paper or for any other papers, if you hold on to this, you can kind of figure out how to work all that.
Okay.
And then formatting stuff and your conclusion. You want to end on a happy note,
Right.
something a little less dour.
Right.
And sort of
suffering.
Yeah, and expand on that so what idea. Make sure that the audience knows that people are losing jobs or not even getting jobs in the first place because of discrimination against online accounting degrees. Because that's something that has a very tangible effect, and it's important that your audience see that. And I believe that covers just about everything. Do you have any other questions for me?
Nope, I think I'm good.
All right, awesome.
Can I schedule a follow-up appointment?
Sure, yeah. What day?
Can I do the same time next week?
Sure, 12:15.
Yes.
And your name was Jessica?
Yes.
Sure, yeah. Did you want Adrian again?
Yeah, that's fine. He was really helpful.
Alrighty, I will put you in there and you'll get an email reminder the day of.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so much.
No problem, have a good one.
Yeah, you too.